Hello, everybody. I do appreciate the people that are viewing and subscribing. This is James Detroit. It is Tuesday, April 7th, and I want to thank you for tuning in. This is a combination of things that I wrote down yesterday and did not get a chance to get to, and then also some things that I'm writing down today. I'm going to try to share with you as much as I possibly can in the least amount of time, but bear with me because it's going to take a little bit longer. Similar to yesterday, I feel like there's some things that we really need to talk about. I'm not a doctor. I'm not trained in the medical field at all, but I can read. And like you, I'm trying to figure out the information that we're receiving today and how much of it changes tomorrow. And then I keep thinking, going back to the beginning. So we got the SARS-CoV-2. This is the biological pathogen and is the cause of the COVID-19 disease. Now, this is a vicious virus. There's no two ways about that. And it is more contagious than the typical flu. The rate at which people become infected seems to be a multiple factor. Maybe this is also more deadly. We don't know that for sure. Not yet. We anticipate that without any action, it would be. It looks like between 15 and 25% of people are asymptomatic, meaning I very well could have it, do not show the same symptoms that somebody else does. 31% of the Japanese evacs out of Wuhan were tested asymptomatic once they arrived in Japan. That's a pretty significant number. An even greater number is 50% of those tested on Iceland. And Iceland, the island country, tested 5% of their population. 50% of those tested asymptomatic. They had it, but they didn't show any symptoms. So we have ongoing developments, though, in the United States with therapies, antiviral drugs, working on vaccines. We have the serological testing, which is the antibody testing. And all of these things are leading to many more discoveries and realizing what we didn't know even 2 weeks ago. And I read about this NYC ICU emergency physician, Cameron Kyle Seidel, and he's talking about the ventilators are damaging the lungs. People are dying from oxygen starvation, not a viral pneumonia. And I don't think we see enough of this on the news. I really think we need a concentrated effort to provide the quick test in a mass scales. And I do not believe that we need to create new structures. I believe we need to use current ones. We need these testing because we understand the law of large numbers. Once we get enough information, we can really start to realize, because 15 to 50% of the people already have it, or maybe the majority. And they seem to show mild, maybe moderate condition, effects of this. And I do want to take this quick minute to point out there's a difference between China, the Chinese people, and the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. It does look like a lot of the evidence seems to point to, because we heard a lot of things. We had all this misinformation. It came from a bat in a wet market. Somebody ate a pandaloin or something. Looks sort of like an armadillo, but not. The most accurate information, or it looks like the most viable information, is that there are two labs about 7 to 10 miles apart in the city of Wuhan that are manipulated and if or not controlled by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And understanding again that there's a difference between the Chinese people and the CCP. I don't think that a guy like me sitting in Davison, Michigan is ever going to decide to go to war with somebody that's sitting in a town in China. But our governments, remember this, our governments can convince us that those people are bad and we need to go and fight them, that they do not have the best interests of the United States of America. And I just think we're on such a slippery slope here. aside from the fact that we're talking about a virus that definitely looks like it was man-made. It's switching gears right away. I would like to say that everybody's talking about this economy, and this kind of leads to getting the large-scale testing done in structures that we already have. I'm talking about the restaurants, the bars, the eateries, the places that are all shut down right now. We should be able to open those things up, especially where there is the availability to open them up. Less densely populated areas. And we should be able to do the testing as we're opening these things up. That's just my opinion, because we really do need to start looking at what kind of a recovery are we going to have. Because we do not have a country to talk about here if we do not start talking about and planning out more in a better fashion than what we had done with this 2.2 trillion and this CARE Act, which could end up being a disaster. But what kind of recovery we're going to talk about? We keep hearing about the talking heads on TV telling us it's going to be a V-shaped recovery. Well, I'm going to ask this question. Will Main Street ever look the same? Because I really have my doubts. And Main Street is me, a small business owner. It's you. It's the other small business owners that are out there. Main Street is not what we see so much on television. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Metropolitan Life have done a survey of 500 small business owners. Now, remember, small business owners represent about 70% of our economy. And of those 500 surveyed, 43% say they will not make it without either government help or a turnaround in economic conditions. Let me first say, I certainly do hope that other small business owners are in line with me. I'm not looking for the government to hand something out. I'm looking for the government to get out of the way. I want to go back to work. I want us to be able to, I want less government. I want more freedom to be able to produce win-win exchanges day in and day out. 43% say they will not make it unless they have a turnaround in economic conditions. Okay. 46% say the economy will need a good 6 months to 1 year for any hope to return to normalcy. That's not a V-shaped recovery. Now, the stock market may respond. Wall Street and Main Street are two different things. I need to read an article from one of the places that I get, because here's another very interesting thing to think about, because all of these things are connected. And it's titled, this section is titled, Another Form of Post-2008 Financial Engineering is Starting to Bite Hard. Supply chain financing is what it's called. The Wall Street Journal posted a story about it early Saturday morning when no one would see it. It did make the front page of today's B section, but that still seems like it's buried, and so we spotlight it here. This little bit of accounting chicanery has been around for years, but it took off after the panic of 2008. Using this financing, the paper explains, companies effectively borrow money to pay their bills, extending, say, 60-day payment terms to 6 months or more. It would be like taking a personal loan to pay a credit card bill. The arrangement can paint a rosy picture for the business's liquidity because the deals effectively boost working capital, but typically don't count as borrowing. The big bond rating agencies are starting to cry foul. The S&P calls it a sleeping risk, says a higher up at Fitch. If banks stop these facilities, it's like cutting credit lines, and we might see some companies run into heightened liquidity problems as a result. Supply chain financing contributed to the collapse of a big British government contractor called Carillion in 2018, and among the companies using it heavily in this country in the present is Keurig Dr. Pepper. Well, that is not I really feel good about where the economy is going, and I really feel good about trusting what the books say. I will say that there has been a number of things talked about that this is unprecedented, that this is something that we've never before seen. You're right, we haven't. And we created it. We made it this way. And if you go back and look at 100 years ago, we experienced a significant pandemic. And as a nation, we responded differently. Both President Wilson and President Harding were in the executive position at that time, President of the United States. They were running things. And they did nothing except for care for the sick the best that they could. Now, you would say, yeah, but it was different then. And I would say, yes, you're right. It was different then as it is now. So let's talk about the differences. Number one, we didn't have vaccines, antibiotics. We didn't have the treatments of the drugs that we had back then, so they couldn't do as much. But we're talking about the combination of things here, both a public health crisis as well as a economic crisis, and the combination of those things. And it was different back then, partly too, because most Americans would have said, well, wait, where in the Constitution does it say that the government's going to send me money? Where in the Constitution does it say that the government's going to give companies money? If you were not prudent enough to save for a rainy day as an individual or as a company, you deserve to go bankrupt. That's what the vast majority of Americans would have said at that time. And Wilson and Harding, with a D and an R next to their names, represented that feeling precisely. It's something that we need to remember, and I quoted this earlier last week in Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises, and it was talking about a bankruptcy, and asked, well, how did you go bankrupt? And the gentleman replied, well, it was slowly at first, and then it was all of a sudden. Well, slowly at first and then all of a sudden is what I want us to think about as the citizenry of the United States of America. This last pandemic we're talking about 100 years ago was prior to FDR. And in my household, we grew up believing that FDR was the greatest president of all time because he did so much. And the greatest influence in my early years was my father's father, my Grant. And he told me about all the great things that FDR did. And he lived, as a young person through the Depression. And it can be argued that the steps that Herbert Hoover was taking, and Herbert Hoover is a under-celebrated American hero in politics. We need to pay him more respect. But the policies that he had in place, historians, again, quoting President Obama, being on the right side of history, historians are very much in agreement that the policies that Herbert Hoover had put into place in his administration, we would have come out of that depression in about 5 years. However, it was such a bad political atmosphere, and Herbert Hoover did not win re-election in 1932, and FDR took over. But those policies that he put into place, history has shown, kept us in a depressed state until 1954. And so part of those policies that went into place is this acceptance by the American citizenry that the government will help you. The government will do things for you. I've often said that to me, it does not matter if there's an R or a D next to a name. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had bank holidays, and he repriced the gold standard and repriced our financial system. And then you fast forward another 40 years, and Nixon did the same thing, only he completely took us off of the gold standard. And so these are things that are both, I will give credit or I will give criticism to both the Republicans and the Democrats over the years. The bigger point I'm trying to make is that today we do have, it was slowly at first, but now it's all of a sudden, we are asking the government to do something for us. We are expecting them to keep us safe. We are expecting them to protect us. And I'm responsible for me. I'm responsible for my education. I'm responsible for my health. I'm responsible for my safety. And as the United States of American citizens, we need to remember that. we need to take the steps to put our to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. JFK had a great quote: "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And I think what we, as the American citizens of the United States of America, we are showing great civil responsibility by helping out. Private industry is stepping up and doing so many things beyond what they are called to do. They are creating ways to be part of solutions. The citizenry of this country, we are responsible for ourselves and in turn, our neighbors. We need to make sure that our elected officials are acting in our best interest. I want to say that I appreciate everybody. There were over 200 views at one time when I looked at it. In Michigan, I sent out a request to make sure you contact our Michigan legislators to make sure that we do not want to extend arbitrarily to this governor, whether she's got a D next to her name or whether it would be an R next to the governor's name. We are not going to extend arbitrarily to anyone the power to be able to make those decisions. So I certainly do hope, and it is almost 4 o'clock. I certainly do hope that the state of Michigan legislative body has made sound decisions in making sure that they tell the governor no. Let's get back to work as absolutely soon as possible. The April 30th date did not need to be a minimum. It needs to be looked at next week even. So I encourage you, I appreciate all of you that called into our state representatives or our state senators. I encourage you to be engaged. And I just want to say that I really appreciate all of you that have been subscribing and viewing. If you like this, please share it with somebody else. And I ask that you stay safe and healthy to the best of your ability, and we are responsible for ourselves. I'm James Detroit, and I'm out.